The Myth of Normal, Trauma, Illness, and Healing in a Toxic Culture, by Gabor MatA, MD, with Daniel Mate. Introduction. Picture this. A man, 71 years old, a respected doctor and author, is flying home after a successful speaking trip. He's been upgraded to business class, the audience loved his talk, and he's feeling that warm glow of a job well done. As the plane descends over the beautiful Vancouver skyline, a text message lights up his phone. It's from his wife, Ray. She was supposed to pick him up. The message reads, "Sorry, I haven't left home yet. Do you still want me to come?" Now, what would a mature, successful, 71-year-old man do? Perhaps feel a flicker of disappointment, then text back, "No worries, I'll grab a taxi. See you at home." But that's not what happened. In an instant, that warm glow of satisfaction vanished, replaced by a surge of cold, hard rage. He stiffened in his seat. "Never mind," he dictated tersely into his phone. For the next 24 hours, he barely made eye contact with his wife. When she spoke to him, he'd reply with little more than a monotone grunt. His face was a tense, rigid mask. What was going on here? Was this the response of a wise elder, or was it something else entirely? That man was Drive. Gabor MatA, the author of the book we're exploring today. And in that moment, as he admits, there was very little of the grown-up Gabor in the driver's seat. Most of him was in the grips of the distant past, a time warp back to the very beginnings of his life. This isn't just a story about a man having a bad day. It's a story about a hidden force that shapes our lives, our health, and our society in ways we rarely ever see. Today, we're diving into a book that has been called a magnum opus, a work that challenges the very foundation of what we consider normal. It's called The Myth of Normal, Trauma, Illness, and Healing in a Toxic Culture. This isn't just a summary, it's an invitation to look under the hood of your own life and our society. By the end of our time together, you'll understand a profound secret, the idea that many of our deepest struggles, our anxieties, our chronic illnesses, our addictions, are not personal failings. They are not a sign that you are broken. Instead, they might just be a perfectly normal response to an abnormal, toxic culture. And more importantly, you'll see a pathway back to what the author calls wholeness, a way to heal that begins with one simple, radical act, questioning what we've all been taught to believe is normal. Book summary. Let's start with a puzzle that sits at the heart of our modern world. We live in the most health-obsessed society in history. We have multi-billion-dollar industries dedicated to wellness, promising to help us eat better, live longer, and feel happier. And yet, our collective health is getting worse. Chronic diseases are skyrocketing. Mental illness and addiction are rampant. In the United States, the wealthiest country in history, 60% of adults have a chronic illness like diabetes or high blood pressure. How can this be? Gabor MatA, after decades as a physician, delivering babies on one end of life and caring for the dying on the other, came to a startling conclusion. He believes that the problem isn't with our individual bodies or brains. The problem is with the culture itself. He uses a powerful analogy. Imagine a laboratory where you're trying to grow organisms. You create a special broth, a culture, designed to help them thrive. If those organisms suddenly start getting sick at unprecedented rates, you wouldn't blame the organisms. You'd look at the broth. You'd conclude that the culture has become toxic. MatA argues that our modern Western society has become a toxic culture for human beings. It's a culture that, while providing material abundance for some, systematically fails to meet our deepest, most essential human needs, our needs for connection, for authenticity, for meaning, and for belonging. And this toxicity, he says, is making us sick. It generates chronic stress that gets under our skin and becomes biologically embedded, leading to everything from autoimmune diseases to depression. But here's the most fascinating part. We've gotten so used to this state of affairs that we don't even see it. It has become, for lack of a better word, normal. He compares it to a story about two young fish swimming along. An older fish swims by and says, "Morning, boys. How's the water?" The two young fish swim on for a bit, and then one turns to the other and asks, "What the hell is water?" The toxic culture is our water. It's the assumptions, the values, the ways of living that are so pervasive, we don't even notice them. And Mate's mission in this book is to help us see the water. He argues that much of what we call normal in our society is neither healthy nor natural. And that to be considered normal often means conforming to demands that are profoundly harmful to our minds, our bodies, and our spirits. So where does this harm begin? To understand that, we have to talk about a word that has become very common, but is still deeply misunderstood: trauma. When most of us hear the word trauma, we think of catastrophic events, war, abuse, a terrible accident. Mate calls this big T trauma, and it is devastating. But he offers a much broader, more inclusive definition. The word trauma, he reminds us, comes from the Greek for wound. He says, trauma is not what happens to you, but what happens inside you as a result of what happened to you. It's the inner injury, the lasting split within yourself that gets lodged in your nervous system, your mind, and your body. This opens the door to another kind of trauma, one that is far more common, almost universal in our culture. He calls it small t trauma. This is the trauma that happens not just when bad things happen, but also when good things don't happen. It's the pain of a child whose emotional needs for connection and acceptance aren't met, even by loving parents who are simply too stressed, distracted, or wounded themselves. It's the feeling of not being seen for who you truly are. As one leading psychiatrist puts it, trauma is when we are not seen and known. This wound, this inner split, has profound consequences. Mate explains that trauma separates us from our authentic selves. It disconnects us from our bodies and our gut feelings. Think about V, the author formerly known as Eve Ensler, who survived horrific childhood abuse. She told Mate, "The last place you want to be is in your body. And so, you begin to live in your head." She was so disconnected that she didn't even know she had a tumor the size of an avocado growing inside her. This disconnect is a survival mechanism. A child can't escape an abusive home, nor can they fight back. So, the brain's only option is to shut down the feelings associated with the pain. To numb out. The problem is, this coping mechanism, which saves us in the short term, becomes a fixed pattern. We carry that disconnection into adulthood, where it no longer serves us. It constricts us, limits who we can be, and keeps us stuck in the past, hijacking our present. This brings us back to Gabor MatA at the airport. His explosive rage wasn't about his wife being late. It was a time warp. The trigger, the text message, sent him back to an unprocessed wound from his infancy. He was born in Hungary in 1944, a Jewish infant under Nazi occupation. When he was just a few weeks old, his mother, terrified for his life, handed him over to a complete stranger in the street to be taken to safety. He survived, but when he was reunited with his mother weeks later, he wouldn't even look at her for days. A famous psychiatrist named John Bowlby called this behavior detachment. It's the infant brain's protective reaction. It says, "You abandoned me, and that hurt so much that I will not dare to open myself to that pain again by reconnecting with you." That deep, pre-verbal wound, that tyranny of the past, as another expert calls it, got wired into his nervous system. Decades later, a minor perceived abandonment by his wife triggered the same ancient, defensive emotional circuits. The rational, adult parts of his brain simply went offline. This is the legacy of trauma. It robs us of what one psychologist called response flexibility, the freedom to pause between a stimulus and our response, and to choose how we want to act. Instead, we get stuck in automatic, defensive reactions. So, how does this fundamental wound, this split from our authentic selves, get created in the first place? MatA argues that it stems from a tragic conflict between two of our most essential, non-negotiable human needs: the need for attachment and the need for authenticity. Attachment is our deep, biological drive for closeness and connection with others. For a human infant, who is the most helpless and dependent creature on Earth, attachment to a caregiver is not a luxury, it is a matter of life and death. Our brains are hardwired to do whatever it takes to maintain that bond. Authenticity, on the other hand, is the quality of being true to yourself. It's the ability to know what you feel in your gut and to honor those feelings. This isn't just some New Age ideal, it's also a survival instinct. If our ancestors on the savannah ignored their gut feeling that a predator was nearby, they wouldn't have survived for long. Here is the heartbreaking dilemma. What happens when a child's environment sends the message that being authentic, expressing their true feelings, especially feelings like anger or sadness, threatens their attachment to their caregivers? A parent, stressed and overwhelmed, might say, "Stop crying right now," or "Good children don't get angry." The child hears an unspoken threat: "If you show these feelings, you risk losing my love and connection." In that moment, a choice must be made. And for a child, it's not a choice at all. Attachment will always win. Survival comes first. So, bit by bit, we learn to sacrifice our authenticity to preserve our attachment. We suppress our real feelings, disconnect from our gut, and trade in our true selves for an acceptable version, a personality that is more pleasing to others. We develop what MatA calls habits of personality, things like being a chronic people pleaser, being unable to say no, taking responsibility for everyone else's feelings, and suppressing our own healthy anger. Does this sound familiar? In our culture, these traits are often seen not as liabilities, but as strengths. We praise the person who is always there for everyone, who never complains, who puts others first. But MatA warns that these self-denying patterns, which begin as adaptations for survival in childhood, become a major source of stress in adulthood. This chronic, hidden stress takes a massive toll on our physiology. And this is where we begin to see the direct link between our emotional lives and our physical health. For centuries, Western medicine has operated on a flawed premise: the idea that the mind and the body are separate. If you have a physical illness, you see a medical doctor. If you have an emotional problem, you see a psychiatrist. But a new science, called psychoneuroimmunology, is confirming what ancient wisdom has always known: you cannot separate the mind from the body. They are a single, unified system. The word MatA uses is the body-mind. What you think, what you feel, and what you believe has a powerful, direct effect on your nervous system, your hormonal system, and your immune system. Chronic emotional stress, especially the stress of suppressing your authentic self, can create real, physical changes in your body. It can promote inflammation, suppress your immune defenses, elevate your stress hormones, and disrupt the healthy functioning of your cells. This isn't just a theory. The evidence is overwhelming. Consider autoimmune diseases, conditions where the body's immune system mistakenly attacks itself. These include things like rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, and multiple sclerosis. A staggering 70 to 80% of people who suffer from these conditions are women. Is this a coincidence? MatA argues it's not. In our patriarchal culture, women are often conditioned to be the emotional shock absorbers of society. They are taught to care for everyone else's needs while ignoring their own, to suppress their healthy anger, and to always be nice. These are the very personality traits that have been strongly linked to the onset of autoimmune disease. One study of women found that those who consistently suppressed their feelings in conflicts with their spouses had over 4 times the risk of dying during the study period compared to women who always expressed their feelings. The body, it seems, is rebelling against a lifetime of self-suppression. It's a mutiny against the self. The same principle applies to mental illness. MatA challenges the mainstream view that conditions like depression, anxiety, or ADHD are primarily genetic brain diseases caused by a chemical imbalance. He sees them not as diseases, but as adaptations, understandable responses to trauma and overwhelming stress. Depression, he says, is not a lack of serotonin. The word itself tells you what it is. To depress means to push something down. Depression is the pushing down of unbearable emotions, grief, rage, sadness, that we learned to suppress in childhood because it wasn't safe to feel them. This shutdown mechanism saved us then, but it becomes a prison in adulthood. And what about addiction? Again, MatA asks us to look past the prevailing myths. Addiction is not a bad choice, nor is it simply a brain disease. He proposes a new definition. Addiction is any behavior that a person finds temporary pleasure or relief in, and therefore craves, but which causes negative consequences in the long term, and that they are unable to give up. By this definition, addictions are everywhere. It's not just drugs or alcohol. It can be shopping, gambling, work, sex, the internet, or even the endless pursuit of power and profit. He asks us to stop asking why the addiction, and start asking a much deeper, more compassionate question. Why the pain? Because at its core, all addiction is an attempt to soothe pain. It's an escape from suffering that has become intolerable. It's a desperate attempt to find the connection, the warmth, the peace, or the sense of self-worth that was missing in a person's life. The rock guitarist Dave Navarro told MatA that when he used drugs, he got a sense of what a human being is supposed to feel like. How do you just say no to that? The pain that drives addiction almost always stems from childhood trauma. Study after study confirms this link. One massive study, the Adverse Childhood Experiences (AC) study, found that the more traumatic experiences a child was exposed to, things like abuse, neglect, or growing up in a home with addiction or mental illness, the dramatically higher their risk for addiction in adulthood. An adult with a score of 6 or more adverse experiences had a risk of intravenous drug use that was 4,600% higher than someone with no such experiences. When we see illness, addiction, and mental distress through this lens, not as individual pathologies, but as adaptations to a traumatizing culture, it changes everything. MatA argues that these afflictions are not a cruel twist of fate, but an expected and normal consequence of abnormal, unnatural circumstances. The ailing bodies and minds among us are not broken. They are like canaries in a coal mine, sending out an alarm that something is deeply wrong with the environment. They are, in a strange way, the sane ones. As the poet Emily Dickinson wrote, "Much madness is divinest sense, to a discerning eye." And what is that environment? MatA widens the lens one last time to look at the toxicities of our culture as a whole. He points to the relentless stress generated by modern capitalism, the uncertainty, the inequality, the loss of control that so many people feel. He talks about the profound disconnection that defines our society, disconnection from ourselves, from each other, from nature, and from a sense of meaning and purpose. We live, he says, in a state of social dislocation, where our vital human need for belonging and psychosocial integration has been replaced by a hyper-individualistic, competitive, and materialistic worldview. This culture of disconnection robs the human spirit. It creates an inner emptiness that we then try to fill with consumption, with status, with anything that offers a temporary fix. Corporations, he argues, have become masters at exploiting this emptiness, designing products, from junk food to social media apps, that are deliberately engineered to be addictive, to hijack our brain's pleasure and reward circuits. They are, in his words, acting with the strategic logic of sociopaths. As one endocrinologist told him, it's not that they want you to die. They only want your money. They just don't care if it kills you. This might all sound incredibly bleak. And it is. But the central message of the myth of normal is not one of despair. It is a message of profound hope. Because if our illnesses and dysfunctions are not fixed, genetic diseases, but processes that arise from our life experiences, then it means they can be reversed. It means that healing is possible. What is healing? Mate is very clear. It is not the same as being cured. A cure is the absence of disease. Healing is the movement toward wholeness. It's the process of returning to and retrieving the lost parts of ourselves. It is, in a way, self-retrieval. The path to healing, he says, begins with acknowledging our suffering without getting trapped in a story of victimhood. It begins with what he calls compassionate inquiry, a practice of looking at ourselves and our patterns with curiosity instead of judgment. He offers a set of guiding principles, which he calls the 4 A's. The first is authenticity. This is the journey of reconnecting with our true selves, our gut feelings, and our core values. It starts by noticing all the ways we abandon ourselves to please others or to fit in. The second is agency. This is the capacity to take responsibility for our lives and to make conscious choices, rather than being driven by automatic, unconscious programming. It's about realizing we have a say in who and how we want to be. The third is anger. This one surprises many people. But healthy anger, he explains, is not rage or resentment. It is a vital boundary defense. It's the energy that allows us to say no to what harms us and yes to what serves our integrity. Reclaiming our healthy anger is essential for healing. And the fourth is acceptance. This doesn't mean resignation or complacency. It means allowing things to be as they are, without resisting or denying the truth of our present moment. It means making room for all of our experience, even the painful parts. Through the stories of people who have walked this path, Mate shows that illness can become a dreadful gift. It can be a teacher that wakes us up from a life of self-suppression and guides us back to our authentic selves. We meet Julia, a woman with rheumatoid arthritis who learns to have beautiful conversations with her illness, seeing its flare-ups as signals that something in her life is out of balance. We meet Erica Harris, a woman given a terminal diagnosis of leukemia who, through a profound inner transformation, not only survives, but becomes, in her own words, the happiest I have ever been. Their journeys, and many others in the book, point to a deeper dimension of healing, one that connects us to what many would call spirit. Mate himself shares a powerful, life-altering experience he had in the Peruvian jungle, working with indigenous shamans and the psychedelic plant medicine ayahuasca. Stripped of his identity as a doctor and healer, forced to confront his own dense, dark energy, he was led to a moment of grace, a transcendent experience of peace and wholeness that was beyond his thinking mind. This experience, he says, taught him that healing is not something the intellect can engineer. It requires surrender. It requires letting go of the illusion of control and trusting a process that is larger than our ego. It requires connecting to that still small voice within us, that part of ourselves that has never been broken, that has always been whole. Ultimately, unmaking the myth of normal is not just an individual task. It is a collective one. A trauma-conscious society would look very different. Our medical system would recognize the unity of mind and body. Our legal system would understand that crime often stems from trauma and would focus on healing rather than punishment. our schools would prioritize emotional well-being as much as academic achievement. We would, as a culture, finally start to provide the conditions that allow human beings to thrive. It starts with waking up. Waking up to the myths that bind us, and to the interconnections that truly define us. Waking up to the gap between what our essence calls for, and what normal has demanded of us. It's a monumental challenge. But as Gabor MatA shows us, with wisdom, compassion, and courage, it is also our greatest possibility. Commentary. As we come to the end of our journey through the myth of normal, I find myself sitting with a powerful and, honestly, a somewhat unsettling feeling. This isn't one of those books you can just read, nod along with, and place back on the shelf. It's a mirror. It forces you to look at your own life, your own struggles, and the world around you with a new, sometimes uncomfortable clarity. The most profound lesson for me is the reframing of suffering. Our culture teaches us to see pain, whether it's physical illness, depression, or addiction, as an enemy to be defeated. It's a flaw, a weakness, something to be fixed, medicated, or hidden away. MatA turns this idea completely on its head. He invites us to see our suffering not as a pathology, but as a messenger. Our pain is a guide, trying to tell us something important about our lives, about the ways we have become disconnected from our true selves. This is a radical shift in perspective. It means that the parts of ourselves we are most ashamed of, the struggles we try so desperately to hide, might actually hold the key to our healing. The anxiety isn't the problem, it's a signal that our nervous system is overwhelmed. The addiction isn't the problem, it's a misguided attempt to solve the problem of unbearable pain. The illness isn't the problem, it's the body's way of finally saying no when our voice could not. This perspective is incredibly empowering. It moves us out of the role of a passive victim and into the role of an active participant in our own healing. It gives us agency. But it also asks something of us. It asks for courage. It takes courage to turn toward our pain instead of running from it. It takes courage to question the stories we've told ourselves about our happy childhoods and to face the truth of our early wounds. And it takes courage to say no to the demands of a culture that constantly asks us to be someone we are not. But what I love most about this book is that it doesn't stop at the individual. It connects our personal pain to our collective pain. It shows us that our private struggles are unfolding within a much larger context, a society that is, in many ways, fundamentally at odds with our basic human needs. This is a deeply compassionate message. It tells us, it's not just you. You are not alone in this. It frees us from the burden of self-blame. So, how do we begin to apply these powerful ideas in our own lives? It can feel overwhelming, but the journey, as they say, begins with a single step. Here are a few simple, practical places to start. First, practice the art of the compassionate no. Just for today, find one small opportunity to say no to something you don't want to do, without guilt or apology. It could be declining an invitation, turning down an extra task at work, or simply saying, "I need some time for myself." Notice how it feels in your body to honor your own boundary. This is the beginning of reclaiming your authenticity. Second, get curious about one of your triggers. The next time you find yourself having a surprisingly intense emotional reaction to something small, instead of blaming the person or the situation, gently ask yourself, what old story is this touching inside me? What does this feeling remind me of? You don't need to have the answer. Just asking the question with compassion begins to loosen the grip of the past. And third, reconnect with your body. So many of us live entirely in our heads. Take just 2 minutes, right now if you can. Close your eyes. Take a few deep breaths. And simply ask yourself, what am I feeling in my body right now? Is there tension in your jaw? A tightness in your chest? A fluttering in your stomach? You don't have to fix it or change it. Just notice it. This simple act of paying attention is a profound step toward healing the split between mind and body. That was a deep dive into the myth of normal by Gabor MatA. We've explored the core ideas today, but honestly, a summary is like looking at a travel brochure for the Grand Canyon. It can show you the pictures and tell you the facts, but it can't give you the feeling of standing on the edge, feeling the wind, and seeing the sheer scale of it for yourself. The real power of this book is in the stories, the detailed science, and the profound compassion that fills every page. If anything we've talked about today has struck a chord, if it has made you curious or given you a flicker of recognition, I truly encourage you to pick up a copy. Reading it isn't just about learning new information, it's an experience that can genuinely change the way you see yourself, your struggles, and the world. The link to the book is in the description below. Also, if you found this summary valuable, and you want to continue exploring the ideas in some of the most life-changing books ever written, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It lets us know we're on the right track and helps others find their way here. Let's keep questioning, keep learning, and keep growing together.